the boy who could have been lost. Before the lab, before the global recognition, before the millions of listeners tuning in for neuroscience advice, there was a teenage boy drifting without direction. At 14 years old, Andrew Huberman was not disciplined, not focused, and not showing signs of becoming a Stanford neuroscientist. He was skipping school, getting into fights, and battling anger that seemed bigger than him. Statistically, his story could have ended in limitation, not leadership. But what changed his trajectory wasn't a viral breakthrough or sudden genius. It was guidance. A few key mentors and teachers refused to label him as broken. Instead, they introduced him to a powerful idea: the brain can change. That single concept planted a seed. He began to realize that behavior isn't identity, it's wiring. Anger wasn't who he was, it was a neural pattern. Distraction wasn't destiny, it was a habit loop. And habits can be reshaped. Slowly, he redirected his intensity into athletics and academics. The same aggression that once fueled rebellion began fueling discipline. Curiosity replaced chaos. He became obsessed with understanding why he felt what he felt, why fear hijacked logic, why impulse overpowered reason, why motivation came and went. That obsession didn't just lead him to study the brain, it saved him. The troubled teenager who could have been lost instead chose to investigate the very organ that once controlled him. And that decision, quiet, internal, uncelebrated, was the first act of optimization. The transformation wasn't dramatic. It was biological. Step by step, repetition by repetition, he began rewiring himself long before he ever stepped into a laboratory. Biology over motivation. We live in a culture addicted to motivation. Short bursts of energy, quotes layered over cinematic music, temporary emotional highs that disappear the moment discomfort arrives. But motivation is unreliable. It fades when you're tired. It disappears under stress. It collapses when fear shows up. What Huberman discovered through neuroscience is something far more powerful. Success is not about emotion, it's about circuitry. Inside the brain there is a constant tension between the amygdala, the fear center, and the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for decision-making, planning, and impulse control. The amygdala reacts quickly and emotionally. The prefrontal cortex responds deliberately and strategically. When you hesitate before a difficult task, when you reach for your phone instead of focusing, when you avoid discomfort, that is not weakness, it is neural dominance. And here's the key insight. The prefrontal cortex can be trained to override fear if you act within a small window of time. In those few seconds between impulse and action lies the opportunity to rewire. Every time you choose discomfort, cold exposure, disciplined sleep, focused work, you strengthen neural pathways associated with control. Every time you surrender to distraction, you strengthen reactivity. Huberman calls this self-directed neuroplasticity. It's not about hype, it's about repetition. Dopamine, the molecule often misunderstood as pleasure, actually regulates motivation and drive. When overstimulated by constant scrolling and novelty, your baseline dopamine drops, making effort feel harder. By managing light exposure, sleep cycles, stress responses, and reward systems, you restore balance. In simple terms, you don't wait to feel motivated. You train your nervous system to execute regardless of feeling. Biology over motivation means that discipline is not a personality trait, it's a trained brain state. And once you understand that, excuses begin to lose their power. The rise of the Stoic scientist. 4 years, Andrew Huberman operated quietly within academia, publishing research, running experiments, and teaching at Stanford. His work focused on neuroplasticity, vision, and how the brain adapts to stress and trauma. He wasn't chasing fame. He wasn't building a brand. He was building understanding. But as anxiety rates increased, attention spans shortened, and digital distraction intensified, people began searching for structure in a chaotic world. That's when he launched the Huberman Lab. Unlike fast-paced entertainment podcasts, his episodes were long, technical, and dense, often exceeding 2 hours of detailed explanation. And yet, millions listened. Why? Because clarity creates confidence. In a world full of opinions, he offered data. In a culture of emotional reaction, he offered physiology. He broke down sleep science so practically that people corrected years of insomnia. He explained dopamine in ways that helped listeners reduce addiction and increase focus. He discussed stress in ways that empowered rather than frightened. His tone remained calm, steady, almost stoic. That composure wasn't an act, it was evidence of regulation. The same teenager who once struggled with impulse had become a model of measured response. But here's the gap most people miss. The authority didn't come from status. It came from internal mastery. Behind the lab credentials and podcast success is a man who had to conquer his own wiring first. The protocols he teaches are not abstract theories, they are lived systems. And that authenticity is why his influence continues to expand, not because he shouts the loudest but because he explains the clearest. Now here is where the story turns toward you. The real power of Andrew Huberman's journey isn't admiration, it's application. Every day you experience small moments that shape your future. When the alarm rings and you choose between snooze and discipline, when fear surfaces before taking a risk, when distraction tempts you away from meaningful work. In those brief seconds, neural pathways compete. If you act intentionally, if you override hesitation, you strengthen circuits of control. If you delay, rationalize, or avoid, you strengthen circuits of fear. The difference between stagnation and growth often exists in less than 10 seconds. Huberman's philosophy reminds us that confidence is not something you feel into existence. It is something you build through repeated action. Each time you choose long-term reward over short-term comfort, your baseline shifts. Your nervous system becomes more resilient. Focus becomes easier. Calm becomes default. The Stoic optimizer does not eliminate discomfort, he trains through it. And that is the invitation. You are not fixed. You are adaptable. Your habits are programmable. Your brain is plastic. The troubled teenager who redirected his life did not possess superhuman traits. He applied consistent neural training. So the question is not whether change is possible. Neuroscience has already answered that. The question is whether you will use the next 7 seconds differently. If this story challenged your thinking, if it reframed discipline as biology instead of personality, and if it made you see your potential in a new light, then stay connected. Subscribe for more deep breakdowns of modern thinkers and the systems behind their success. Because this isn't about motivation, it's about mastery. And your rewiring begins now.